I would like to start with you, Julie. And I was, as I was thinking about how this conversation will go, I was really struck recently by a post by one of our speakers whom you met at ZEG last year, who said, who's a Georgian journalist and activist, who said the question that we should have asked all along before we got to this place where we are, and the question we should be asking today is what have we been doing wrong? So do you have any thoughts on how we are in the mess that we are in and what it is that we've been doing wrong?
I think you summarised it fairly eloquently just now and in a very evocative way. I found that, I know you well, but I learned things about you and also about the way you see the world that I wasn't aware of before. So I just want to take a moment to say that was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And what it showed to me, let me start with what we're doing right. This is right. It's in human conversation, physically connected to others, disconnected to an extent, hopefully, although I'm sitting here with this blasted device, from all of that noise and trying to be centered and anchored in conversation about what is not just urgent, to your point, but about what matters and to have meaningful exchanges. But I think what we did wrong, and I'll start with what I think I did wrong as a journalist and academic, which was to buy into the lies to an extent of the folks we now refer to as the broligarchs, the men who told us that we had to move fast and break everything, basically, and that the casualties were just the product of progress, as you suggested. So I spent, probably from 2008 until about 2013, training journalists in the use of social media. You're talking about the kind of Twitterization of journalism. Google it. I wrote those words. Now I'm sitting here going, honestly, that was just so misguided. And I was not alone, but I think I had somehow suspended the critical thinking of the investigative journalist that I had been proud to be and the academic that I was becoming, and instead being titillated by and excited by what was described as this kind of democratization of communication, because it did partly speak to what we'd failed at as journalists. And you also kind of raised this point, Natalia, which included this, the failures of the 24-hour news system, which, your anecdote of just, fill in the blanks by talking to people who are suffering after you do the live cross. That's a classic demonstration of what we failed at. But there was promise in that early social web about global connectivity, and some of those things held, right? We know people, we have been able to be connected, even when I was, sitting at the bottom of the world in Australia, in ways that we previously wouldn't have been in real time. But for me, thinking about that period, and which is sort of, that the early promise of the social web, and looking now to the real threats and challenges, and brackets some opportunities, of the AI revolution. I think one quote that I remember using that I want to turn on its head comes back to me, and that is the American academic Clay Shirky, who used to dismiss people's skepticism about social media and the threats and the risks that it posed in terms of what we now know to be true, viralized hate speech and disinformation, for example. He said there's no such thing as information overload, only filter failure. You see, it's us. It's not the broligarchs and their technology and their profiteering, which Chris was able to so potently expose. And I now see that we are occupying a world where we have total filter failure, right? Where the information overload is both making us tune out, drowning out the truth, and somehow dividing us. The polarization that it delivers is really challenging, and I worry it's insurmountable. So I've just touched on a couple of things there, but that's my...
Chris, do you worry it's insurmountable? Do you worry that it is insurmountable?
In a way, yes. I think if we surpass a critical threshold where technology controls every aspect of our lives, whether it's what you see, what you eat, anything. I don't know if you've seen the movie Wall-E. Have people seen the movie Wall-E? I don't know if I'm like dating myself. It's kind of an old movie now, but it's a Pixar film. And the premise of the film is like humanity has destroyed the Earth, the environment, so it's all gone up and living in a spaceship. And they send this cute robot down, Wall-E, to like sort of fix up the Earth and stuff. But the thing that I find so terrifying about that film, actually, is not the total destruction of the Earth, which is scary in itself, but how people are in that future where AI controls everything. So they sit in their little entertainment pods as sort of these infantilized slobs, just blobs, just consuming whatever is fed to them. The captain of the ship doesn't even know how to pilot the ship. And I think that there's two real threats to humanity. One is climate change, where we physically destroy the ecosystems that are necessary to survive in terms of an external threat. There's also an intrinsic threat, which is just infantilizing and destroying the essence of being a person, an autonomous individual who's capable of like interpreting things and thinking. And this is where AI, I think, becomes a real threat to people. You know, if you imagine a future where everything around you is mediated by something that watches you and thinks about you, where it can see you at all times, but you can't see it, and it makes choices for you, how can you exercise your agency as an individual if the world is literally reacting and thinking about you? You know, if you went back in time and told somebody there's this entity that watches you, thinks about you, makes judgments about you, you would be talking about something spiritual or divine. And I think that one of the failures to your earlier question around, you know, what have we got wrong, is we have not listened to what a lot of the leaders in Silicon Valley literally are saying, right? When you listen to whether it's Sam Altman, Elon Musk, lots of people, they make references to the idea that we're creating some kind of supernatural entity in the servers. You know, Elon Musk says, God might appear in my servers. He's actually said that. And if you put yourself in that position and sort of imagine, so what does that make you, Elon Musk or Sam Altman? Are you some kind of new savior, messiah, where you're not a descendant of God, but you actually are more important because you become the creator of God? And it sounds a bit out there and a bit crazy, but they literally talk about this. And my fear is that once we start to realize the true power of what we're creating, once we're inside of it, you can't really escape. You know, I think about if you watch like a horror film, like ghost movies, right? A haunted house. What is so scary about a haunted house, right? What's actually scary about a ghost? You can't see it. It can see you. It has motivations that you don't quite understand. And it will subtly start to change your environment and you go crazy. And that's literally what AI does. It will make you go crazy to the point where you don't know what's real and what's not. And if we do that to our entire society, we've undermined the very basic thing that allows us to be cohesive.
Yeah, whenever I think, about what we were doing wrong, and it would be great to also talk about, because I think that has changed what we're doing wrong now. I always thought that, to me, we were not listening, and we were not taking the threats seriously. We were not listening to what was being said. So Chris, I mentioned the podcast when I was introducing Chris, but basically about a year and a half ago, we teamed up with Chris because we wanted to tell kind of the story of Silicon Valley and the AI, and we needed, Chris is a data scientist and AGI engineer, we needed an insider. You call yourself a tech bro, basically, and you're very much, I don't know why I'm now speaking on your behalf. He loves technology. But we teamed up because we needed, we had a reporter on the story, but we also needed an insider who could explain things to us and our listeners in ways that we wouldn't be able to. So while doing this investigation, which we, lasted for like several months, and we'll bring up the barcode on the screen a little bit later too, so that you can, ironically, it lives on Audible, a tech platform, but you can sign up for a free trial, listen to it, and then never pay. But at one point we were going to, one of the chapters of the podcast dealt with like the future of media. We looked at labor, like different aspects of life, and Chris was going to join us in Perugia at the International Journalist Festival. And he got stuck in Dubai because of the floods in Dubai. So he sent us a voice memo from Dubai, from a party that he ended up at, that I would love, Sasha, if we could play that, that really encapsulates some of the things and illustrates well some of the things that he was just talking about. So can we play that clip, please?
Okay, so I don't know if you can hear me. I'm in the toilet at this event, and it's interesting because people here, they're talking about longevity, how to live, like, if not for a long time, how to live forever, but also prepping, how to prepare for when people revolt and when society gets completely undermined. And the thing that I think about is you have, in another part of the world, a bunch of journalists talking about how to save democracy. And here you've got a bunch of tech guys, tech bros, thinking about how to live past democracy and survive.
Again, it's worth listening to the whole thing, and we can get to the barcode that you can use, download. But Chris, so that like really encapsulates kind of the culture of Silicon Valley and that religious aspect of it that I think you bring out also very well in the podcast itself. Things have changed a little bit, I think, with Trump and with things becoming much more obvious. And I think people are, when we were doing it, I think fewer people were realizing the stakes. Do you think that has changed? Do you think more people understand the stakes now?
I think people are starting to clock that there is an aspect of a cult being created in Silicon Valley. And all the weird things that come out of Silicon Valley, big tech, all the sort of weird tech bros, when you really start to look at it through the lens of this is a cult with a sort of weird doctrine, if I can call it that, about completely transforming humanity. They call it transhumanism. I don't know if people saw the interview with Peter Thiel, where he could not bring himself to say that he wants humanity to survive. Because if you're a transhumanist, it literally means transhuman. You see the evolution of humanity as silicon, that you are creating the next evolution of humans that will not be strapped down with corporal or temporal mortality, that we can create something that is immortal and that is all-knowing and that can transcend the universe. And when you start to look at what these people want to build, but also that these are like not just crazy cuckoo people, which they are, but they're crazy cuckoo people with like billions of dollars, A, and B, with patsies in the White House, the most powerful nation on earth.
It's the first elected oligarchy, basically.
It is
what we're dealing with, isn't it?
It is such a precarious situation that we are in. Because when you have access to the reins of the most powerful nation on earth and its government, and then simultaneously you are building the most powerful technologies in the world, like, you can be unstoppable. And when you look at these people's obsessions with things like longevity, biohacking, living forever, right? Which is being a promise of, religion and messiahs for, since the dawn of time. I will let your soul live on forever. It's always a promise. And this is the next incarnation of a promise. And if you combine promises like that with a militant ideology and resources, at best you get a crusade, which kills a lot of people. At worst you get some kind of apocalyptic event, which even Peter Thiel can't quite bring himself to say he doesn't like, which should freak people out.
It should. And I mean, you were asking the question of what we did wrong. As much as what, the people you've described are properly bonkers, they are also incredibly powerful, as you say. And what we've failed at is taking them at their word. If we think about the Trump administration as the sort of first elected oligarchy, especially when Elon was dancing around the stage with a chainsaw, literally hacking into everything, those were promises that were made. They were published. It all existed. The blueprint existed. And we in the press and members of the intelligentsia, the academic community, public intellectuals, the press, we were so savvy that we kind of collectively dismissed this as amusing, untenable. I mean, we heard this in 2016, it's okay, it's just a Simpsons joke, it's not really going to happen. We didn't take it seriously. And now we're reporting it, for the most part still, as though it's business as usual, instead of actually reporting this phenomenon in the same way that we would argue that we should cover a cult, we should report on a cult, because this is effectively a doomsday cult, on one level.
Just to add to what Julie is saying, there's like this bizarre double standard that exists, right? So if you take all these wacky, crazy things that Elon Musk says, that Sam Altman says, that, if you took those words and you put them into the mouths of like the CEO of Ford Motor Company, right? If the CEO of Ford came out and said, we're going to unemploy the majority of people and that's our plan, people would like ask questions about that. Right? If you had, the CEO of some insurance company say, I think that God might be living in my computers, right? Like they probably wouldn't have a job the next day, right? So, and when it comes to all of these people who are arguably more powerful than these other CEOs, that we then somehow just give them a free pass on saying crazy shit. And it's a huge failure of media to literally what Julie just said, to not actually listen to what they're saying and just sort of ignore it. When they're constantly telling you, hey, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do, and then you keep sort of acting shocked like that is actually happening. Yeah. They don't hide stuff.
I mean, obviously there are people who are trying to do something about it, and Europe is one place where lots of attempts are being made to stand up to. So before we open up, and I promise, so think of your questions, we want you to jump in, but I just want you both to reflect a little bit about the regulation efforts, both in Europe as well as Australia, where actually you were from, and where, there are right now, there's a big debate about like the YouTube, bans and so on. So the governments have woken up, and the governments are trying, and also, Trump recently suggested sanctions for EU officials who are voting for regulation against American tech companies. Is it too late? Are these regulation attempts going to make a difference, or are they even cutting to the core of the problem?
Do you want me to start?
Whichever.
Do you want to start? I'm going to start. One of the failures, sorry to keep harping on about the failures, but one of the failures was the failure to learn from the failures with regulating social media and applying those lessons to the need to get ahead of the AI revolution. And so we're playing catch up, but the catch up is, it's not happening. We're not catching up. We're not catching up because we aren't investing in the responses in the ways that are necessary. So we don't have the same level of investment in countermeasures. We are not prioritizing, human rights and safety by design. And even though we are now seeing some shifts, a lot of the regulatory effort is ham-fisted. I mean, you mentioned Australia. So while I applaud the effort of my homeland to deal with the Web 2.0 threats, things like gender hate speech, racist hate speech, for example, through social media regulation, which was ahead of the curve, what they're doing now with trying to protect children, so under 16s, by essentially requiring the upload to the web and to various apps of identifying information about them where their privacy is being breached. I mean, this is a real problem and very kind of counterintuitive.
And the same law in the UK as well.
Yes, exactly. At the same time, though, some of the efforts to, for example, tax appropriately big tech companies in Europe and the UK and Canada have been kind of undercut and undermined by outright bullying from Trump in the tariff wars, and so we were finally making progress, towards the middle end of last year prior to the election. It felt like progress was coming. And I do applaud Europe for the EU for attempting, to introduce regulation in a way that was designed to ensure some degree of accountability or to improve, the possibility of having safe, secure interactions online so that we could continue to have democratic deliberation in public spaces of the 21st century, which include digital spaces. But this is, it's beyond David and Goliath, to use a bit more religious imagery. This is such an unequal battle because you have this array of billionaires now aligned with lawmakers in the US who are using kind of diplomacy, in a sense of foreign policy overreach, to countermand the regulation of the EU, of Australia, of Canada, and so on.
I think broadly there was a failure to realize that building technology is an ideological act. This idea, I think, was popular for several decades, that technology is somehow just sort of, it's not political, right? But every aspect of the design of the internet has been built with a capitalism in mind, Western notions of individualism, of reduction of choice, right? An algorithm is not designed to show you and enhance your choice. It's there to narrow you down into a segment and show you the ad that you'll most likely click on so that you purchase something. Design and engineering and architecture is really political. And I think about other social battles that we've had around who gets to decide what design looks like. in the United States with the civil rights movement, so much of the battle of equal rights for people of color was about really mundane things, right? Where do you get to sit? What water fountain? What door do you use, right? Very mundane things that collectively created a really insidious product, which was a segregated, racist United States. And in other parts of the world, you had ghettoization in many, many societies. And I have not yet really seen any kind of coherent regulatory proposals around tackling that ideological threat in the design and engineering of what's being constructed.
Yeah, because all the regulation is very reactive to what already exists.
Yeah, and if you think about all of the problems that we're seeing right now with AI, with disinformation, with social platforms, right? A lot of them have analog analogies, right? If you think about Facebook as a building, right? That building has this magic sign on the door which says, we can do whatever we want to you as soon as you open this door. And by opening this door, you agree to a 40,000 word novel that's sitting in the lobby where you waive all your rights. And you get into that building, the doors lock and you can't get out, and it becomes a maze. And not only that, you go into that building and you go through the entrance for white people, but there's also another entrance for gay people, for Jewish people, for black people, and they all see completely different things. Now, if we actually design that building physically, it would not be lawful. Mm-hmm. But we allow our entire digital architecture to use the logic of segregation in construction. And I haven't seen regulatory proposals that tackle that problem, which is an underlying ideology of design.
The infrastructure. And it's because the arguments about speech, freedom of expression, which are twisted.
But do you have free speech rights to construct a whites-only neighborhood?
No.
Is that free speech?
No, and freedom of expression is protected insofar as it's designed to support the maintenance of human rights. This is the problem, right?
Yeah, and I think this is also the other issue that we in the world are confronting, which is that the internet and technological design is infused with American values, which are not necessarily congruent with the rest of the world, right? In Europe, we believe in human rights. And free speech doesn't trump the rights of every other person to have and experience safe places. And so I think really actually taking a step back and not talking about banning this, banning, but actually like what is the underlying ideology that we want to use in engineering and design, and starting from that point.
But how do you unbuild what we have? How do you start from scratch?
You can always blow stuff up.
Said like a tech pro.
Do we have any questions from the audience? All right, we've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have lots of questions. All right, let's start with you, and if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Alex. Thank you for the really interesting conversation. Well, Chris, you said, I really liked your analogy of Facebook being like a building. The first thing I thought is there's like 3 billion people in that building right now. And I had a conversation about this with Alex Dunn at the ZechFest in Tbilisi this year. And one of the core questions on the panel that we arrived at is it even possible, essentially, to have a healthy form of global communication in that way? Or is the whole project simply a waste of our time? It's clear it's not easy to back out of it at this point. The box has been opened. So what do you think? Is it possible to have good social media? Is this idea tenable at all, or are we is there any cause for optimism? Because there's a billion people. How do you reach everyone, right? And everyone has to speak to everyone, and information gets filtered. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I think, yeah, of course you could have, if I use the term social media, I think you could have social media which is respectful of human rights. If that's like a basic requirement, I think that is possible to do, but it's not going to happen with Facebook, right? It's not going to. If you to talk about buildings and further that analogy, right? If we were talking about a city of people that is segregated with walls, it's ghettoized, and it's being pumped full of toxins, propaganda, we would probably demolish that and start again if we really wanted to build a desegregated society, if we wanted to build something that doesn't shove pollutants into this part of the city and screw all of these people. And so I think, like, in theory, the answer is yes, but it requires the dismantling of the current architectures of American-centered big tech, which, by the way, I think is eventually possible to do.
I want to add on just very quickly. So another thing that Alex and I had to discuss was essentially, is it futile to try to solve the problem of social media when there's the underlying causes, right, so to speak? And maybe the solution isn't more technology of a different kind. Maybe the solution is to, and I'm sure you don't agree with that necessarily, it's just, maybe a lot more of the conversation should be on, okay, let's talk to our friends. Maybe we should stop worrying so much about technical solutions and just, be human.
The solution to political problems is always political, it's not technological. So I don't subscribe to technological solutionism. I don't think we can tech our way out of a horrifying future where everyone is out of work, dependent on a new feudal class, where who can't even say that they want humanity to survive. There's no app that's going to solve that. That's a political problem, and I think one of the other problems, in particular with the media, is we really are not talking about the elephant in the room, which is these are now political leaders in Silicon Valley, and they want to completely undermine our society. And we're not addressing that as a political issue. I do not think that these companies should be allowed to exist in their current form.
So how would you, how would you try and address that? How would you regulate that? Maybe after the next question from the floor.
Yeah, we should try to get to how to question, because otherwise we'll all be depressed and left with no hope. But there was one question in the back. Yes, you in the blue shirt.
Hi, everyone. My question is actually far from this topic of discussion, so apologies for taking us on a different route. And thank you so much for the panel. I think you gave us a lot of food for thought. My name is Giovanna. I'm a Brazilian journalist based here in Amsterdam. I was thinking about something that you said, Julie, and allow me to just disagree with you very briefly. You said that Trump was the first pro-oligarchy elected. I think before him we had Bukele, Nayib Bukele in the... what I was in El Salvador. What I was thinking was that people like Bukele open the waters and test the waters for Trump and for many other authoritarians. And also, digital authoritarianism is not exclusive from the oligarchs. I think we had many examples in Venezuela, Maduro, doing biobanking, for example, to control control more of people's lives. We have examples in many countries in the world. But yet, in terms of journalism, I think there's little solidarity or long-standing forms of journalism that connect those dots for people. I was wondering if you have examples or if you have notes of hope as well on how to kind of bridge those gaps and continue fostering those stories as well. Because I think there's a lot of more local and important storytelling to be brought to kind of light than focusing on the go-to stories when it comes to digital forms of authoritarianism.
So shall I respond to
Yeah, go.
I mean, you make several excellent points, and I think they get to one of the basic problems, particularly with the Western press, particularly with the Western Anglo press, where there has been graphic ignorance of what's happened in the majority world, and what's sometimes referred to as the global south. So I think, and one of the things I've tried to do in my work as a journalist academic is actually to look at news organizations, for example, in countries like the Philippines, to look at Coda Story, to look at the Daily Maverick in South Africa and Rappler in the Philippines and others. And that includes considering, the way that Brazilian journalists have dealt with the Bolsonaro, regime and its aftermath. But to consider the ways to sort of reinterpret innovation away from a kind of tech-led concept to one which demonstrates what human innovation looks like in the face of unrelenting existential crises, threats and challenges. And I think that there's an enormous amount to learn, and I think I wrote about this as a sort of, the threats and challenges moving from the east to the west and understanding what they look, how they are manifesting. And then, Chris, you've talked about this too, about the Philippines being like the petri dish for, certainly for Cambridge Analytica and other tech bros who are seeking to exploit these environments for massive profit and political control. But I also think that it's a failure of history. It's a failure of the mainstream press to understand culture and history in a way, and to tell the stories that do connect the dots, which is again why I think what Coda does of trying to understand the currents and contextualize deeply the undercurrents, that we are looking at, and to contextualize present situations very deeply is vital. But we are now so polarized as societies. And I think the distinction with some of the examples that you gave is that this kind of oligarchy that we're dealing with now is so, multifaceted in terms of the tech that they are, proliferating across all aspects of our society, and most importantly, across the sort of human connectedness that comes with conversation and debate, where there is this failure of shared understanding. So we have to be able to deepen and humanize our reporting and our storytelling, and to properly contextualize it, and to kind of, to reconnect across these deep divides where we're being pushed further and further and further into these nasty corners of the online universe. If you're a young man who's having some kind of misogynistic thoughts, you find yourself well and truly very quickly connected to the Tate brothers mantras. This is something that's very difficult to address through potent storytelling, as important as it is, but we have to try.
Chris, do you have anything to add? Or should we take the next question? You have something to add. Go ahead.
We'll take another question.
Okay, let's take another question. Okay, we've got a question. White shirt, third row, white shirt. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Brenda. My question is also more in the tone of what you are telling us now. So it's about what to do, and what's the role of countries that are more advanced with technology-wise, with the global south. I'm from Mexico, for example, and I'm thinking of Latin America. Then we are putting a lot of effort on how to regulate technology, how to regulate AI, and what might feel in some places like catching up, for other countries or for other contexts, is not so much catching up. So it's also learning in the way that we don't have maybe all the technologies applied as broadly as here, but what can we do to regulate it better? If there's any learnings that we can take, and also what can we teach also other countries, because we are already regulating or trying to, and we are thinking of the best ways to do it, the challenges we face, And perhaps mutual learning would be good. What can we learn in terms of journalism? Julie, you were mentioning, but also what can we learn in terms of regulation? And yeah, like this is my question on how can we do it better?
Go.
Sure, I'll start. So I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of the global south, when I talk to politicians from the global south, I think the first thing that I say is like, many of these countries are suffering the lingering effects of colonialism. Colonialism, which was typically some kind of rush to collect resources, whether it was, minerals or timber or rubber or whatever, whichever part of the world. There's a bunch of rich white men going in, taking resources, undermining the political infrastructure of that country, and then when things get too spicy, leave you with the problem. I think that what we're seeing right now with big tech is the new iteration of colonialism in the 21st century. It is a rush for resources. It's just those resources are data. It's your attention. And the impact is very similar, which is like an undermining of local governance and local people. The reason I say start with the notion of resistance is that if you were resisting a colonial occupier, you would not first start talking about how do we regulate their behavior. We say kick them out. And so I think, as much as like it would be nice to talk about, well, we could implement this policy or that policy, I think we're going to get far beyond that. I think that's like nice liberal elite conversations that have faith in governance structures that are clearly failing or have already failed. And so I think like recognizing that these big tech companies are your new occupier, and that if you believe in your national sovereignty and your right to self-determination as a people, it is resisting. I'll leave it at that.
I actually want to add something. One of the things that was very striking to me at Stanford, where I spent 2 years, is that there is a very widespread, very common belief among all sorts of people, including academics and kind of the intellectual elite, and not necessarily people who are working for tech companies, that nation states is like a fading phenomena that is going to be the thing of the past very, very soon. There is real belief that there will be no more nation states. And
just empire.
Yes.
Which is we're literally just repeating history.
Right.
We're just repeating history.
But obviously, there are countries also who are very aware of what you are saying, who themselves represent very, dark forces, such as Russia, that is, for example, now making a huge push for sovereign internet. Russia just rolled out a mandatory mobile app that you have to use the government-issued message, they basically state-endorsed messaging app on all cell phones sold in Russia. So where do you think we're headed to in the future? Is it going to be countries with sovereign internets and then countries that can't afford them just are screwed? Or is it like, how do you think it's going to play out? Is your crystal ball, Chris?
I think it's going to get messy. Really, I think it's going to get messy. And when I say I think we're repeating history, I really literally mean that. When you look at, the rush for Africa back several hundred years ago, right? And the chase for resources, I think that's analogous to what's going to happen now. And I think probably you're going to get situations where at some point people resist. If you have governments of countries that end up becoming co-opted, or are no longer able to exercise their authority in the national interest of people, and people wake up to that, I think you will get revolutions. And I think that that is the end point of a lot of what's going to happen. I can't, like, just think about it, okay? You have Sam Altman saying, hey guys, give me billions of dollars so I can put everyone out of work, but don't worry, I will be the issuer of universal basic income, and you can just depend on my lagresse.
That sounds great to a lot of people.
But do you really believe it? These are people who won't even pay their taxes.
Exactly.
So, you know, and do you think
men.
that people will just sit back and say, to the notion that you no longer have your independence, you no longer have truth, you no longer have a job, you no longer have any aspect of being an autonomous human. You are just an end, a means to an end.
Meanwhile, eugenics is their other fascination.
Wow, we're going there. Okay. This is actually something that we talk about in the final episode of the podcast. Not to like plug the podcast, but there.
No, you should totally plug the podcast.
But,
Sash, could you plug the podcast? Yeah, this is the barcode to download the podcast.
If you want to be really depressed, like, you can download it. And yeah.
Look, people are leaving. They don't want to be depressed. we're getting woke out.
Motivating people.
We're going to get to the hopeful bit.
Yeah, I need a drink. Everybody needs a drink
now.
There's a bar outside, guys. What I think you're referencing with the eugenics bit is, like, when you look at the fascination that a lot of people in tech have with longevity and improving the genetics of people, the idea of transhumanism, taking control of our destiny and modifying people, it sounds nice in the abstract, like a future without disease, all babies will be perfect. But you combine that with an ideology, and who gets to decide what we are editing out of humanity? And if you then combine that with a future where, again, Sam Altman is in charge of all the government resources because all the AIs now have replaced all people, which infantilizes your government because your government, it depends on some aspect of people or technology to enforce its power. So completely usurping government. And then coupled with an interest in improving humanity, right? What I'm freaked out about is if you go back just 100 years to Europe at the turn of the last century, there was a movement called futurism. And the futurists were fascinated with the future, that we're on the cusp of all of this technology that's going to liberate people from disease, it's going to liberate people from work, it's going to be amazing. And they helped found and co-found all of the different fascist parties that then ended up taking over. Right? The Italian Fascist Party was co-founded by futurists. Futurists were always interested in this idea of, like, technology coupled with a strong man who's going to, like, become our leader, and come hell or high water, will execute on his vision. And you look at how much this industry worships the idea of the founder, the idea of this strong man who, like, screw all of you. I have my vision and I'm going to execute it. I'm going to break everything until I get my way.
The parallel authoritarianism, right?
And you put those people in government, you put those people in charge of the mechanisms that make society function, right? You are, like, one step out from fascism. And I really think that we need to recognize that we are, like, this close. If you look at Mark Andreessen, one of the most powerful VCs in Silicon Valley, he literally quoted fascists in his Tech Optimist Manifesto.
Yeah.
And did anybody talk about it? No. He quotes fascists.
And this is another failure of the press to the question.
Yeah, and no one talks about that. You're absolutely right.
Because they get a pass.
Yeah.
You have one of the most powerful investors in the world talk about his love of fascists.
Yeah.
And people just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's difficult to understand whether it's blissful ignorance or if it's some kind of complicity when it comes to, you know, the failure, or fear when it comes to the failure of the press, and particularly the US press, where you still encounter journalists who want to argue, well, we can't be too critical of, you know, of big tech, and we can't be too promotional of the need to regulate, for example, because this represents an attack on freedom of expression.
Yeah. Also, I think, to be the devil's advocate, I think part of the problem with the coverage, as well as this conversation, is the fact that what we're talking about is so enormous that it makes you feel so disempowered, because it just makes you feel like, well, look, there's nothing I can do, so I might as well go and get a drink.
Exactly, I'll go to the bar.
They already did.
I know, wise people. But you know, and we have talked about this a lot, but like, how do you know, what is the solution? Do I give up my phone? I don't want to give up my phone. I like Uber. I like being able to order my food. I actually like scrolling through Instagram or TikTok. Like, these conveniences are not easy to give up.
Yeah, but convenience doesn't, like, the price of convenience doesn't need to be human rights. Like it doesn't. These are not mutually exclusive things. We can have both.
And I just need to, like, you know, human rights, rule of law, democracy. This is what we fought for 80 years ago.
To your point about, is it too big? I mean, like, you literally come from a country that had revolutions. Like, you can resist authoritarianism, and people have been doing it for centuries. It's really annoying that we have to keep doing it, but, like, we can succeed in doing it.
So so basically, what you're saying is that what we need to internalize and fully embrace is the fact that this is the new form of authoritarianism.
And you really need to internalize the scale of the problem, and that technology is an ideological act, and the solution to an ideological act is also political.
And to reimagine resistance, which is what you're talking about.
So those guys who went to the bar, they missed what we all need to do. Do not tell them.
You can have a drink first, too.
Yeah. We have a question right in the back, and then closer. I think we can take a couple more.
My name is Wouter. Thanks so much for such inspirational talks. I was just wondering, because you now mentioned you talk to politicians, the solution might be rather politics than technique. Question to Natalia. You organized such a wonderful get-together here. Did you manage to invite any Dutch lawmakers, any politicians? Are there any here? Because I would love them to be here.
It's a question.
Or are we going to, like, out people now? Like you over there. Yeah.
Dutch politicians, please raise your hand. I think we have
There's
our
one in
answer.
the front row.
Get them, guys.
So next time when we come back, can we please make sure that we've got the politicians? Yeah. So, yes. No. They're not here.
One up the back.
We have one more question over here and one right at the back. And let's see how many we can get to, since we have so many. No, there is, yeah. Oh. Okay, that's, yeah, can we take that one, the green, and then the stripy shirt in the back. And if you could keep them shorter now, that would be great. Okay. So.
Hello, my name is Yasmin. I'm very curious because we were talking about the problems and a couple of solutions like regulation and politics and resistance blowing up a building. But I'm really curious how you, and on the other hand, there's the convenience of all the apps, but how do you see an alternative future and where all those things are combined?
If I said feminist internet, right? Imagine what that would be if you took the internet and rewound. Okay, and we're back in the, although a lot of women did actually participate in the construction of the internet, but if you if you had all of the engineers at the time sit down with feminist thinkers, right, progressive thinkers, to think about vulnerable people, to think about how power can be expressed, how power can be abused, what is the point of society, and integrate those principles into engineering design, we would have a completely different internet. We do not have an internet right now that is designed to help you, that is designed to liberate you, that is designed to enhance your choices. The current methods of design, whether it's in AI or actual web design itself, is to narrow, is to move you away, to separate you from others, to say things to you and not to those people, right? That's not about community building. That's not about integrating or bringing people together. That's about separating people. Every aspect of the internet is political and ideological. And so if we are talking about what could a new internet, what could new AI look like, ask yourself, what would a feminist design if she could go back in time? And what are the priorities that we want to address with that technology? Is the purpose of the internet to buy stuff? Because if you think about it, most of the internet right now is designed to sell you stuff and to take money from you.
It's to interrupt, but that's what we a lot of us know and what a lot of us agree on. But how can we get out of this situation?
Yeah.
Then, if
how do
it's
we
not
unbuild
only
what we
regulations and if it's not only political, or
could you please pass the mic so that we can get...
I think, so if to answer your question really literally then, if it starts with regulation, it's regulating the principles of engineering, right? Choice enhancing architecture, human rights by design, risk assessments, safety audits, right? I think it's ridiculous that we have more safety rules for a toaster in your kitchen than we do for a platform with 1 billion people. Think about if you were just to make any random object, like a child's toy, what do you have to do in order to release that toy into the public? You have to go through regulatory standards. You have to make sure that the paint that you're using is child safe, it's not toxic. You have to go to a regulator to show that you've met the bare minimum safety standards, and then you release the product. None of that exists with tech. There is no safety regulator for tech. There's no standards for tech. Right? The closest we have is sort of GDPR, but this is not a data protection issue. So it's so much more fundamental than that.
There is the e-safety commissioner in Australia, the one thing that they got right. One woman at the bottom of the world who used to work for Twitter. But it's a start. The problem is that we're so overwhelmed by these challenges now, and we missed so many opportunities, that human rights by design and safety by design approaches, which are really important, require us to dismantle the extreme capitalistic model that we are beholden to.
And I think also regulating the profession. So regulating the way we design, and then also there are thousands and thousands of people who build every single day within these companies. And there is no ethical or professional standards that we impose upon software engineers that we do for other professions, right? If you're a physical architect or an engineer, and you go and design a bridge that you know is probably not safe, you lose your license if you're caught. Your company gets dissolved, and you lose your license and you can't practice, and you're shunned by the profession. If you're a software engineer that builds a product that is watching, for example, in Myanmar, militaries use your product to contribute to a genocide, there's no obligation for you to report that, to stop that, right? and you go, oh, well, you know, I was just following orders. This is what my boss told me to do. And then the legal department said, we'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's accountability.
Yeah. And then you aren't getting exposed to it at the point of like I actually made a point of talking to a lot of engineering students at Stanford, which does produce some of the best engineers in the world, asking them whether, using the Myanmar example and what happened with Meta and the role Meta played in genocide in Myanmar. And all of them said to me that most of them did not know about it, and it had never been mentioned throughout any of their 4 years at one of the best engineering schools in the United States.
I have also an anecdote about that in 2019, at a conference in New York, weeks before the pandemic hit. Actually, it was January 2020, weeks before the pandemic hit. And it was the first time I'd been involved in an event which was convened by what used to be referred to as the human rights wing of Google, which was Jigsaw. And it was to focus on and to try and address the challenges of gender-based online violence, as we now refer to it. And I was convening some of the small roundtable discussions that were designed to try and assist Google to address this crisis of networked misogyny. And they did bring, to their credit, engineers in from Twitter. This was back before Elon. And Twitter allowed their engineers to come to the table. YouTube didn't, also owned by Google. Meta wasn't there. Meta didn't want to engage. But I had conversations like those with young male Twitter software engineers, and they also said, we've never heard, like some of the women in the room, Patricia Campos Melo, amazing Brazilian journalist, who actually was subjected to some of the most horrific gender-based online violence from the president, former president of Brazil, who bravely sued him and won and continues to go through the courts. She was there, along with other women journalists and human rights defenders. And these young engineers were like, we've never met people like this. We've never heard. We had no idea what they were experiencing.
Yeah.
So I think this is very relevant.
Detachment is really very real.
But do we have the time? How do that's a revolution that takes time. It's like the kind of media literacy response to disinformation. Sure, it's a good idea and it's important, but it's like a medium to long-term solution, whereas we are in this very urgent crisis.
I can't believe we are almost out of time and we haven't got the solution. We have like 2 minutes to get to the solution. There was one question, yes, to you, and we're going to take one from the back of the room. Can we take both questions right now, and then we have to wrap up? So if you could be brief as well. So.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible. My name is Romain. I just want to jump on the emergency that you mentioned, because how do we talk about the emergency when actually the reason why we got there is because of the emergency. It's because every time we need to make a bridge to win the next AI race, we need to address a new threat by relying on the most just baseless algorithm and predictive technology, and we get the politician to adopt the next technology when it doesn't even work. And there is an emergency to adopt it, and there is an emergency to talk about this, but how do we talk about emergency anymore? Is there a way to talk about it still?
So many parallels with climate change and how we...
Yeah, there are. Let's take, so hold the answer to that, and let's take one more question.
Hi, my name is Pascal. I'm a philosopher and I've been working in media all my life. To go into the emergency, seem to be going back and forth this evening between two very slow reactions. One is political regulation, the other one is maybe a company building other technology for us. Well, maybe I'm very much inspired by Martin Heidegger, who develops a free relationships toward what he calls a free relationship towards being, which means we develop ourselves before we, develop a relationship with any contingent technology of any age. Isn't it more our job to develop this technology? Is the technology not already there? I mean, there is open source alternatives all around. And do we not have the obligation to pay for our technology, not only with money, but also with our attention to really force ourselves to also understand it, so not that it be understood only by the people who just hand it to us and we just use it while we are being used, then mostly I feel. Because we could adjust these open source media. They are free, but really free. We are not being instrumentalized. We are able to adjust it to our own local needs, in a liberating way. Make this technology really ours instead of just, using either political technology, which is of course dangerous, or the technology of a company maybe based in another country, which has no regulation in every other country outside, because that's what multinationals do, of course. Sorry for my long question, but I hope any of this...
Yeah, I think both questions, not that I will dare to summarize them and bring them together. Actually, I will. I think one thing that I've thought a lot about, and it kind of reflects a little bit of what both of you said, is that maybe part of the responsibility that each of us have on a very individual level is also embracing the complexity of the fact that maybe there is no one single solution, and maybe trying to find that single solution, a new platform, a new law, is what prevents us from addressing the real problem. Would you agree as we wrap up?
So
a little hope. Sprinkle some hope.
So I'm not again. I love open source technology, so I'm not against that as one part of the toolkit to solve the problem. But what I take issue with what the woman was talking about, I think it obfuscates the responsibility of the companies that are building and profiting from these things that are harming people. If I was to use an analogy, imagine we said this about car companies. Like, okay, there's all these cars and they're exploding, they're not safe. So like, it's our responsibility to find a new car. We wouldn't say that. We'd go, why are these car companies making something that's dangerous? And like, let's ban it. Let's stop them from doing that. And so, as not to say that I'm against open source technology, I love it, but I don't think saying let's just like let the problem fester and like we're going to go and build our own thing, I don't think that's realistic.
We have to do both. We have to, I would love to say that Mastodon was the answer, and that sort of people being kind of segregated across.
I remember Mastodon.
Yeah, across kind of open source technologies. In their silos that were somehow going to be self-regulated. The problem is, these technologies will continue to exist and to exploit people's desire to participate en masse, to be on trend, and so therefore you're going to continue to require regulation. I mean, and that regulatory effort is so urgent.
And to couple that regulation with like actual penalties.
Yeah.
So. Like,
massive penalties.
Which includes criminal liability for executives who contribute to things that are criminal, right? Like, this is one of the issues. I can't believe that we have products that contribute to, in COVID, huge numbers of deaths of people who believed in anti-vax conspiracy theories, who then harmed themselves or family members, because of what an algorithm told them. And that there's no liability for that. Or that you can sit and be the CEO of a platform like Meta, where you contribute to crimes against humanity, and this is not me saying it, this is the United Nations saying it in Myanmar, you literally contribute to crimes against humanity, and like, that's not criminal. I mean, so I think when we talk about regulation, it's like, because it sounds like sort of this, large book of rules that no one reads. It also means that it has to have teeth as well. If Mark Zuckerberg was worried that the feds are going to come knocking on his door tomorrow, he would fix these problems.
Instead, they're lining up behind Trump on stage at the inauguration because they recognize that efforts to regulate American big tech companies have utterly failed in the US. And it's not going to resume that struggle anytime soon. But to take us back to the United Nations and something to reflect on, here in Europe, where, and I referenced this before, but the Council of Europe, the United Nations were as well. They were founded in a post-World War II context in an effort to ensure that the Holocaust wouldn't be repeated. And the big fat elephant in the room is not only that the Holocaust is being repeated in a different time, in a different place, with different protagonists and different targets, but that journalists are also being murdered at a greater rate than they were murdered in World War II. So in the context of the struggle to regulate these systems that are strangling truth, we also have this parallel rise in authoritarianism and a reversion to a kind of a pre-peacetime struggle. And so what we need now is a kind of new approach to an intergovernmental solution, notwithstanding what Chris was saying earlier or you were saying earlier about nation states. But if we resolved to commit ourselves 80 years ago to democracy, the rule of law, and human rights, and to do so with a massively flawed but nevertheless ambitious system of intergovernmental effort to prevent a resurgence of such catastrophic circumstances, how do we actually rebuild something like that addresses the failures of individual states regulating, and what kind of networked response, regulatory networked response can we get beyond what the EU is trying to do, and beyond what some Latin American countries and some African Union countries are trying to do?
Well, that is $1 million question that we're not going to get to tonight. I tried my best to end on a hopeful note, but I failed.
There is a hopeful note, which is
go
like,
on.
we've overcome so many things as a species throughout like tens of thousands of years that this is just another blip on the road and that we can overcome it. It's just like, it's a big problem that we have to figure out.
Yeah, and we have to face. So thank you for coming and facing it with us. Our time is up, but the